Traoré 2.1B trade deal has shaken the very foundation of the world economy. What just happened in August 2025 is not a headline. It is a thunderclap. It is the moment America's grip on Africa cracked before our eyes. For 5 centuries, Western powers extracted, controlled, and dictated. But in one signing ceremony, in one stroke of the pen, Captain Ibrahim Traoré delivered the most devastating blow to economic imperialism in modern African history. This is not just about numbers. It is not just about tariffs or exports. It is about power. It is about dignity. It is about Africa declaring to the world, our resources will no longer serve Wall Street billionaires. Our resources will serve our people. On August 15th, in Beijing, President Xi Jinping and Captain Traoré signed a $2.1 billion zero-tariff trade agreement, a contract that mainstream media refuses to show you, a contract that Wall Street fears, a contract that has turned boardrooms in Washington upside down. Brothers and sisters, what you are about to hear is more than a business story. It is the sound of chains breaking. It is the proof that independence is not a dream. It is a choice. And tonight, we will walk together through the facts, the fallout, and the future that this deal has unleashed. This is African Life TV, your unfiltered voice for truth. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because this journey is not just about Burkina Faso. It is about every African nation ready to rise. And if you believe in trade freedom, let your voice be heard in the comments. August 15th, 2025, Beijing. A date that will be written into the economic history of Africa. In the Grand Hall of the Chinese capital, under the watchful eyes of the world, President Xi Jinping and Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso signed what Western intelligence agencies now whisper about in fear. The agreement that changed everything. The figures are staggering. $1 billion in guaranteed trade volume over the next 5 years. 0 tariffs on every Burkinabe export to China. Financing at 2% interest compared to the World Bank's crushing 8 to 12%. Technology transfer clauses, opening doors to advanced manufacturing and resource processing, and $800 million earmarked for infrastructure development that will finally serve African people, not foreign corporations. But this was not simply economics. This was political thunder. This was historical correction. This was a nation long dismissed as landlocked and hopeless, declaring to the empire, "We are no longer yours to control." 72 hours before this signing, Washington had shown its hand. The United States slapped a brutal 50% tariff on Burkina Faso's shea butter exports, the country's second largest earner after gold. It was economic warfare, a clear message, submit or collapse. But Traoré's answer came with fire. Within 3 days, he replaced the American market with a $2.1 billion Chinese partnership signed without quotas, without restrictions, without political strings. Dr. Fata Kabor, Minister of International Trade, a Harvard-trained economist who returned home to serve her people, captured the essence. The Americans thought they could starve us into submission. They forgot that China has 1.4 billion consumers who value quality African products. We did not just replace the American market. We upgraded it. The signing ceremony itself carried symbolism that no statistic could capture. 2 leaders, one from the east, one from the heart of Africa, shaking hands over papers that shattered centuries of Western dominance. Photographs of that handshake traveled across the continent like wildfire, printed on the front pages of African dailies, shared on millions of mobile phones, captioned with words like freedom, resistance, and victory. For too long, trade deals meant African raw goods leaving ports for pennies, only to return as finished products sold back at 1,000% markup. For too long, the language of development aid masked dependency and humiliation. But this deal flipped the script. For the first time, the value chain remained in Africa. The profits stayed in African villages. The dignity returned to African workers. Listen closely. This is why America panicked. This is why Wall Street trembled. Not because Burkina Faso signed one deal, but because Captain Traoré had shown every African leader that there was another way. A model not of charity, not of dependency, but of sovereignty. From the bustling markets of Ouagadougou to the quiet farms of Koudougou, the message spread. The empire can be resisted, the chains can be broken, the future can be ours. Even as the ink dried in Beijing, Diplomats in Washington scrambled, analysts in London drafted emergency memos, generals in Paris convened late-night meetings. They understood what was at stake. If one nation could walk free, others would follow. And when Africa walks free, the empire falls. This was not just a trade agreement. It was a declaration of independence written in numbers and signed in defiance. Traoré had struck where it hurt most, America's grip on Africa's markets. And yet, as the celebrations rang out in Ouagadougou, as villagers danced in the streets and African youth posted triumphant hashtags across social media, a darker question hung in the air. Because empires do not surrender quietly. What Washington was about to unleash would prove that this was not merely a deal. It was the opening battle in a new war for Africa's soul. Within 24 hours of the signing in Beijing, Washington struck back. The empire was wounded but not defeated, and like a wounded beast, it lashed out with fury. The U.S. Treasury expanded sanctions overnight, blacklisting 47 Burkinabe officials and their families. Bank transfers were frozen. SWIFT networks blocked payments linked to Chinese partners. Pressure calls went out to European capitals, demanding that Burkina Faso's products be boycotted, its ports monitored, its economy strangled. But this was only the beginning. AFRICOM quietly moved 3,000 troops into neighboring states. Training exercises, they called it. 12,000 soldiers drilled just 50 kilometers from Burkina Faso's borders. Drones buzzed overhead, circling the skies of Ouagadougou day and night, turning a sovereign capital into a surveillance zone. Refugee camps became recruiting grounds as special forces slipped in, seeking to train and arm opposition fighters. Economic warfare, military intimidation, and then the third front, information war. $200 million in emergency funding was poured into propaganda. CNN, BBC, Reuters all rolled out the same narrative, China's debt trap in Africa. Think tanks in London and Washington churned out reports warning of new colonialism. Western universities, 25 of them, received sudden grants to produce academic papers condemning African-Chinese cooperation. And on social media, an invisible army was deployed. AI-generated accounts posted fabricated stories of Burkinabe protests, fake videos of empty factories, rumors of hidden debt. The goal was clear: fracture African unity, sow doubt, weaken Captain Traoré before his example could spread. But here is what Washington did not expect. The agreement was bulletproof. Chinese negotiators had studied decades of American economic sabotage. This deal was designed to survive it all. Payments flowed not in dollars, but in yuan and digital currency. Shipping was routed through Chinese-controlled ports in East Africa. Insurance was covered by Chinese state firms. And legal disputes would be settled under international arbitration beyond the reach of American courts. Colonel Adu Sanfo, Burkina Faso's trade security coordinator, put it plainly: for the first time in our history, we have a trade relationship that America cannot sabotage. They can sanction us. They can threaten us. But our goods will still reach Chinese markets, and investment will still reach our people. This was the moment when Washington realized it was no longer dealing with a dependent state. It was facing a sovereign nation, fortified by design, backed by a global power willing to rewrite the rules. And that terrified them. But the deeper fear was not Burkina Faso itself. It was the domino. If Mali, if Niger, if Chad, if Guinea followed the same path, the entire structure of Western dominance in Africa would collapse. That is why the empire escalated so quickly, throwing every weapon, economic, military, informational, at this small, landlocked nation. Yet the more they attacked, the stronger the resolve grew. In Ouagadougou, crowds gathered in defiance, chanting Traoré's name. Across Africa, hashtags exploded: trade freedom, Africa rises, end imperialism. And in Washington, panic meetings stretched into the night. The empire had met resistance, and resistance was spreading. But the real earthquake was yet to come. Because what followed in the weeks after the deal was not just resistance. It was a continental awakening that even Washington could not stop. What America feared most began to unfold within weeks. The Traoré 2.1B trade deal did not stay confined to Burkina Faso. It sparked a chain reaction, a domino effect rolling across the continent with unstoppable momentum. First came Mali. Long trapped under French exploitation of its gold, Mali announced a $1.8 billion mining partnership with China, reclaiming resources that had been siphoned away for decades. Then Niger, the land of uranium, signed a $2.3 billion deal with Chinese nuclear companies, bypassing European middlemen for the first time in 60 years. Chad followed, entering negotiations for a $1.2 billion oil refinery, ending its dependence on overpriced European fuel imports. And Guinea unveiled the largest of them all, a $3.4 billion bauxite processing facility, doubling the value of its aluminium exports through Chinese-backed investment. Each deal carried the same message: the Burkina Faso model works. African leaders were no longer waiting for permission from Paris, London, or Washington. They were striking agreements that served their own people first. Dr. Rivera Sanjay, former executive secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, called it the most significant economic realignment since decolonization. The numbers told the story. In 2020, China-Africa trade stood at $176 billion. By 2024, it had surged to $292 billion, a 65% increase. By 2025, projections pointed to $340 billion. Meanwhile, U.S.-Africa trade was in freefall, $64 billion in 2020, collapsing to $47 billion in 2024, and projected to drop to just $31 billion in 2025. For the first time in modern history, Africa traded more with Asia than with Europe and North America combined. But beyond the statistics were the human faces of liberation. In Kudugu, 34-year-old Aminata Sawato once sold raw shea nuts to European buyers for 200 francs per kilogram. Those same buyers processed the nuts abroad and sold shea butter back for 2,000 francs, keeping Africans trapped in poverty. But with the new processing plant built through Chinese partnership, Aminata now sells finished shea butter directly to Chinese cosmetics firms for 100 or 800 francs per kilogram. Jobs stayed local. Profits stayed in the village. Dignity stayed in Africa. Ibrahim Traoré, not related to the president, a 28-year-old logistics coordinator, testified to the transformation. Before, we had to ship through European ports. They controlled the shipping, the insurance, the financing. They took 40% of our profits. Now we ship directly from Ghana to Shanghai with Chinese logistics. Their fees are 12%. Overnight, we tripled our net income. And then there was Fata Kore, a 41-year-old agricultural engineer overseeing quality control. European buyers always criticized our standards, always demanded endless certifications. It was their excuse to pay less. Chinese buyers judge fairly, pay market prices, and pay immediately. They treat us as equals, not as beggars. The transformation was measurable. Average income for shea processors rose 280% in 18 months. Employment in new facilities jumped 450%. Women's participation in export industries leapt from 23% to 71%. Village investment in schools and healthcare rose 340%. This was not charity. This was justice. This was the fruit of independence. And it was not only Burkina Faso. Across Africa, young people were watching, learning, believing. They saw their futures not in migration boats crossing the Mediterranean, but in new factories rising in their hometowns. They saw proof that sovereignty and development could walk hand in hand. This is why Washington trembled, because the empire understood that once the idea of freedom takes root, no army, no sanction, no propaganda can kill it. But could this fragile new independence survive the storm? Could these nations hold their ground when the empire deployed its full arsenal? Tell me in the comments, do you believe Africa is strong enough to protect its economic freedom? In Washington, the alarms never stopped ringing. What Captain Traoré unleashed was more than an African trade agreement. It was a direct challenge to the very foundation of American global dominance. For decades, U.S. officials spoke of partnership with Africa while enforcing dependency through loans, tariffs, and military bases. The Traoré 2.1B trade deal shattered that script. It was proof that America's grip on Africa was no longer secure. Inside corporate boardrooms, panic turned to anger. Multinational firms that had grown fat on cheap African resources watched their profit forecasts collapse. Investment banks wrote reports warning of a strategic loss of Africa. Pentagon briefings painted scenarios of a continent no longer bending to Western influence. Across Europe, the reaction was divided. Paris fumed as its centuries-long grip on West Africa slipped. Berlin hesitated, torn between loyalty to Washington and hunger for Chinese-led markets. London whispered warnings, yet quietly prepared back channels to Beijing. The old colonial powers were no longer writing the rules. They were scrambling to keep up. And beyond the West, the message resonated. Leaders in Latin America, in South Asia, in the Middle East studied the Burkina Faso model. They saw that a small, landlocked nation had defied the empire and lived to tell the tale. They saw that independence could be structured, protected, and scaled. The Traoré deal became not only an African story, but a global precedent. But perhaps the greatest shift was psychological. For centuries, Africa was told it must choose between sovereignty and survival, between dignity and development. Traoré proved that was a lie. As President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa declared, Burkina Faso has shown us that we do not have to choose. We can have both, but only if we are brave enough to break free from old patterns. That bravery spread like fire. Youth across the continent posted in their millions, "We are not weak. We are not dependent. We are ready." But with every victory came a greater threat. Because if America and Europe could not control Africa through economics, they would turn to darker methods that put Captain Traoré himself in the crosshairs. The Traoré 2.1B trade deal was not the end of a struggle. It was the beginning of a storm. The more victories Burkina Faso claimed, the more vicious the empire's response became. Leaked intelligence revealed a covert operation codenamed Trade Disruption. Its goal was clear: crush Burkina Faso's model before it could spread. Economic sabotage intensified. Western shipping firms began refusing to transport Burkinabe goods. European insurers quietly blacklisted routes linked to China. Coordinated currency manipulation targeted the CFA franc, driving instability across West Africa. Cyber attacks multiplied, 47 major incidents in August alone. Supply chains were disrupted, banking systems hacked. Meanwhile, covert political interference accelerated. Hundreds of millions of dollars flowed into civil society programs designed to build opposition movements inside Burkina Faso. And the shadow war grew darker still. NATO staged massive military exercises, 23,000 troops just across West Africa's borders. Intelligence agencies hunted for weaknesses, infiltrating networks, identifying key supporters of Traoré's revolution. Most chilling of all, credible plots surfaced, assassination plans targeting the captain himself and his closest advisors. But the empire miscalculated. Instead of breaking Burkina Faso, these attacks forged a shield of solidarity. Across Africa, public opinion hardened. Citizens rallied around leaders who dared to defy the West. Social media flooded with messages. Touch one of us, you face all of us. Young Africans, making up 67% of the population, found inspiration in the defiance. They saw that leadership was not about bowing to Washington or Brussels, but about standing tall for dignity. They studied Mandarin, enrolled in business schools, launched new enterprises, building bridges eastward and across the continent. A new generation no longer begged for aid. They demanded respect. President Cyril Ramaphosa's words echoed, "We can have dignity and development, but only if we are brave enough." That bravery was no longer theoretical. It was alive. It was moving. It was contagious. Yet the question remains. The empire has not surrendered. Its resources are vast, its playbook ruthless, its willingness to destabilize limitless. The storm is gathering on the horizon. The real question, brothers and sisters, is this. When the storm breaks, will Africa stand united, or will fear divide us once more? The storm is here, and yet, amid the thunder and the lightning, one truth shines brighter than ever. Africa has proven that independence is not just a dream. It is a choice. For 500 years, we were told we could not survive without the empire. For 65 years since independence, we were warned that without Western markets, our economies would collapse. But the Traoré 2.1B trade deal shattered that lie forever. A landlocked nation once dismissed as hopeless now posts the highest growth in West Africa. Youth once desperate to flee now build businesses at home. Women once excluded from global trade now lead new industries. And the message has spread. 15 African nations are already negotiating similar agreements. Asia's doors are open. Technology transfer is rewriting our future. For the first time in modern history, Africa trades more with Asia than with Europe and America combined. The chains are not only loosening. America's grip on Africa has been broken. But brothers and sisters, freedom is never given. It is taken, defended, protected. The empire will not forgive, will not forget, will not surrender. Which means the struggle continues. Which means the test of unity lies ahead. Captain Ibrahim Traoré did not simply sign a contract. He declared a future where Africa belongs to Africans. He reminded us that sovereignty is worth sacrifice. that dignity is worth danger, that the next generation deserves more than poverty wrapped in foreign promises. So let us speak with one voice. If you believe that Africa's resources must serve Africa's people, type trade freedom in the comments. If you believe leaders like Traoré deserve protection, share this message with everyone you know. And if you are ready to stand with a rising Africa, hit subscribe to African Life TV and join this movement. Because history is not written in silence, it is written in courage. The Traoré 2.1B trade deal was not just a contract. It was a declaration that Africa's tomorrow begins today.